Hello and welcome. You're listening to the audio presentation of She Came From Nowhere, the novelization of a 13-book series. It is the story of a secret agent from a multiversal government agency discovering the location of God and taking action to kill her. The series covers the war between gods and mortals who create and destroy themselves and their worlds. The novels are written and performed by Caleb Morazi. If you would like to support the creation of this series and add input of your own, swing by patreon.com/shecamefromnowhere to become a secret agent. You'll get access to the entire novel, new series chapters as they become available, and audio from each. Link in the description. And now, enjoy Chapter 9, A Hole in the Head. 1. Sarah Kay speaks to a Furbtech prototype under glass in the vault. Your Majesty, war means death for many citizens. I don't want that, but will accept it if you force me. He hears her, but many years as a warrior makes him suspicious of any peaceful plan. The struggle wasn't something he was looking forward to. He would lose huge portions of his network. Their world would become uninhabitable, and in the aftermath, many would get sick and starve, but in the end, he would have every creature under his control. The CIB, the Imogen, the Menasker, everyone. That would be the moment he would shut it all down. Everything. In one go. Every sentient creature in the multiverse would stop, leaving every ravaged world at rest. He longed for the silence already. Leaving anyone behind would be a problem. It didn't matter if they were the most benevolent statistician or the worst brute. Every one of them would become tyrants over time, exploiting the planet's resources for their own benefit. It was something that he had noticed in every world he had visited, and something that he was even more acutely aware of as he looked into the aspirations of creatures from all walks of life. That's why they were so vulnerable to the Furbtech. That was the world it promised them. It was the very thing she was doing. Your aggression leaves me no choice, she says. The CIB's acting director leaves the vault, shaking her head, data showing the mind links spread across the multiverse. He doesn't know who he's messing with. 2. Across the mind links, Sakan felt parts of the network dying as Sarah Kay slaughtered them en masse. She didn't want to lose focus. She was going to find the Imogen. Exhausted, Griffin stumbles over his feet and words pacing the floor. She's changing, Director. She's power hungry, and she doesn't know how to control herself. Juan nods, smiling knowingly. We're aware of the danger. It's under control. Sakan was ready to fight when she met the Ravan peoples, but they all had eyepieces, Furbtech, or both, connected them to the Scrabbies and the Mer people. The Min-Ents on their world required special adjustments to the physical hardware since they didn't have brains in the same way the humanoids did, but they all had taken on owl-like hamsters. Instead of opposition, the Illic was immediately recognized and treated like royalty. They gave her food and drink, a place to rest, and the only time they got upset was when it was time for her to go. It was passive at first, trying to entice her with comfort. The war raged. They were beginning to see it on their planet, and they didn't want to lose the closest thing they had to him. When Certain took full control of the mind link, they saw him, and couldn't let her go to what they thought was her foreseeable death. However, with access to the mind link, Sakan could see their true intentions. They knew they'd soon be losing most of the connection with the multiverse, and they needed to be the one of the few that could at least stay connected with their own mini-network. She really did understand their desire. They were a set of people so different from one another who finally understood each other, and they didn't want to lose that again. So she made her way to the closest entrance into the infinite hallway. It was only by clawing her way through the mobs who tried to hold her back. The Ravans attacked from the sky, the Scrabbies on land, and the Mer people in the sea. The Min-Ents stretched their vines to trip her up. Every creature pleaded with her. Death is coming for us all, they said, but she couldn't listen to them. She had orders. Griffin tripped as he rushed to plead with Sura, ending up on his knees before the director's chair. As he looked up, he realized this was not the man who he had served. This man had been replaced by Sarah Kay's power, the perfect person to support her. The end is coming for us, Griffin, Juan says, sounding like the puppet he was. Don't you think we should be the ones who are able to choose how it does? 3. Is this what you want? Sequit asked the owl-like hamsters she rescued from Ahael. You've consumed almost everything. What then? Don't you understand that you've reached the end of your usefulness once you've gathered every creature to you? On every planet Imogen stood, she held her Furbtech up to look at the vastness of space. I tried to show them a better way, but you've assured them that you have a better plan. I made them uniquely different on purpose. It's for their own good. By touching her forehead against the little creature, she could tell that it and its extended network were more concerned about being forgotten than they were about the effect they were having on the worlds. Their programming told them that they were working for the greater good, but none of them were able to consider the fact that their sole function was to survive and spread without any other purpose beyond that. The creatures were bred without self-awareness, and they passed that trait on to every creature they bonded with. It made them useful tools to be driven toward grand purposes, but there were always this need to be a mastermind behind it. If that person fell prey to the charm of the network, it would lead the entire massive organism into a death spiral. And that's what you're headed for if you don't let go of them, Sequi says. I can't make you decide to stop without being a tyrant. I honor all of your abilities to create. I love seeing all the things you have become and made. I wouldn't take it from you. So please, I'm begging you to stop. You're running out of chances. Sequi asked this of the Furbtech on all the worlds at once in many different ways. It would have been easy for her to accept that they were going to do what they were going to do, but she couldn't. She loved them too much to just give up on them. 4. Nestled in his CAK_BRD cocoon, Certain yawned. His victory was at hand. He wanted to savor the moment. They're easy to fool if you give them what they want, he says. An explosion rocks the cavern and Sebastian storms the Mindlink's headquarters, his Faraday infuser liquefying every piece of circuitry in gooey explosions. You can't hide, he yells into the darkness, firing more shots at the interconnected drones swarming him. He is severely outnumbered, the sheer force bearing the otter under a mass of bodies. 5A_K0N examined her data, recalculating the numbers. Something was off. They were receiving duplicate IPs from planets across the multiverse, and, after limiting the false positives, she discovered worlds had broken free, developing their own networks. Wharton's claws on the Emperor's throat drew Certain back to reality. Call them off the otter or I'll bleed you out, the Illic says. Any trickery, and I'll end you. CAK_BRD moved quickly for one of human origin, freeing himself with an attack Wharton recognized as distinctly Illic. Certain? The first rank asks in surprise before going after him. Even without wings, the Emperor was quick-footed, running up a wall and kicking the attacking Illic in the face as he evaded capture over and over. Who else do you think? Certain mocks in their dark tongue. Who else do you know who wants to bring about the end of all things? He suddenly switched his stance from defense to offense, lunging at Wharton's knees and knocking him to the ground. After trying to hail the Emperor and getting no response, 5A_K0N knew she either had to deal with the seceding networks or trust that they would be fine on their own. You want to continue living in a broken world, Certain growls, backing up as he's approached. As they near the wall, Triton steps from the shadows, tearing a massive power cable in half, the pieces arcing electricity before he makes CAK_BRD a conduit. High voltage surges through the Mindlink network, dropping 5A_K0N to her knees. For the first time since she's been given an eyepiece, she was totally free. The silence of her mind, being able to only hear her own thoughts, made her suddenly laugh. She had been so inundated for so long, she forgot even what being a single entity felt like. She knew it wouldn't last long, and although she had thought she'd been a willing participant, her new awareness made it clear the Mindlink had fooled her consciousness, making her believe only what was useful to it. As the current continued to flow, she struggled to her feet and staggered to the nearest null1L_KAN, shutting down its signal. The Emperor's smoldering body hits the floor, and Triton leaps over the writhing power cables. That's your brother, Wharton says to him in the deafening silence. I hoped it wasn't going to come down to all this, the Prime Leader says sadly. It was so quiet that 5A_K0N was afraid to breathe in fear that she would break the spell. She was worried about the world she looked after, but she knew that they would be okay. When the current hit the Emperor's body, Certain leaped out. Usually moving from host to host was calculated and intentional, but he was so quickly outed he moved to the only place he could think of, the multifaceted mind of the Angel. His lifeless form had been discovered and dismembered on Lysander, so here he rested, unable to even control the body because it existed in so many places at once. Here he was just one of the many, many voices vying for control while being shouted down by others. He would wait it out, form alliances among the other minds, and rise to the top, like always. Wharton picks up the Emperor's corpse. I want to be sure, he says, looking at the quanta beneath the surface. He's not here. Only the human must have got out. Like other freed members of the Mind Link, 5A_K0N didn't know what to do with herself. Who could she trust? How would she know their true intentions? What if they tried to harm her? She hadn't done any of her own thinking in years, and it scared her. Sebastian claws out from under the mob, scratching and biting everyone he could, even though they weren't giving him any resistance. He was mad, and his face throbbed from the freshly drilled eye holes. He powers up his Faraday infuser when he sees the Illics. He didn't know them, but he wasn't going to take any chances. In some ways, certain wishes he had been born a multidimensional creature since Trayton had never experienced loneliness. He was still an outcast, but what was new? 5. Sarah Kay, the CIB director, stands in her VR chamber with Flockhart as the carnage unfolds on Trephinate. We must burn it all if we're hoping to make something useful. I was thinking something very similar myself, Ancient Tutor replies. He'd been the one who spearheaded the FurbTech project long before these young whippersnappers arrived. Breeding the perfect creature-machine hybrid was difficult. There had been decades, in fact, where he was sure that they would never see any results. But here they were, his creations, creating the widespread disorder he so badly craved. The director envisioned the multiverse as one with no temporal dampeners, allowing her to make it the place she wanted it to be with no one the wiser. Her agents swarmed the planets with their superior technology, wiping out the mind-linked population. Her outfit changes, becoming more stylish and increasingly comfortable. The screen fills with carnage, each image shrinking to make room for more agents reporting in. She leaves the chamber shaking her head. You know it's big, and then you see it all at once. Flockhart follows her. Is this why you retired from being the director, she asks. We started as a monitoring agency, he says, trying to avoid threats to Central before they arrived. I left when we started focusing on control. I couldn't stomach it. Who do we think we are applying our ideals onto other cultures and worlds? I guess I should have seen it coming. The whole Bureau was formed out of fear. Makes sense. We just discovered the multiverse and it terrified us with its overwhelming possibilities. Out there, everything we met was spooky and weird. We did the only thing that every sentient creature tries to do. Try to tame what we couldn't understand. Well, we'll be lucky if we get to keep you around for a long, long time, Sarah Kay says, her outfit changing again along with the entire office and Flockhart. He shriveled up into dust inside an urn which sat in a glass case beneath an oil painting of himself. In Sarah Kay's current universe, the professor's longevity experiments failed, but the FurbTech project was an almost immediate success. Other forms of mind linking had been scrapped and the owl-like hamsters were spreading rapidly so the SIB could keep tabs. The violent world that occurred when Flockhart was alive simply faded from memory, the old man becoming a figure of the distant past. Sarah Kay re-enters the VR chamber to monitor the movements of her ruling agents in every known universe. There was unity and peace. The only real problem was the meddling and ever-present Imogen. It was a good thing, though, since the populations had been part of the MindLink community for 3 generations. When they were encouraged to break free, they found what it was like to feel alone. Many returned to the fold with no coercion. 6. Terence Godleb tried to comfort the stranded tourist, 5A_K0N, who claimed she was part of a government experiment in a microcosm, and this wasn't the real world. She was unaware that he was a central agent. He had been placed on long-term assignment on Trephinate and was supposed to keep an eye out for ripples. This tourist stank of ripples. He nodded to keep her talking, but was only half listening until she mentioned the creature. Without changing his body language, she suddenly had his full attention as she described the rogue agent who was only whispered about. 5A_K0N explained how they worked together in a non-existent neural network and she'd seen him flee. Terrance wanted to know more, the ripple tingling his psychic sense. Despite his thought shielding, 5A Canol N could sense his excitement. Terrance faced a choice: abandon his post and play it safe, or miss the multiverse's biggest quarry. As they talked, the agent was furiously hacking his Verbtech's biofeed. He didn't want the Bureau knowing he'd gone off-world. It wouldn't fit the director's strict protocol, and he'd have agents on his tail. He'd made up his mind. This would be his victory, and he'd smooth this ripple by bringing the rogue agent to justice. He knew he could do it. The rebellion would be overlooked, and he would be lauded as a hero. Take me to him, Terrance says, shocking the tourist who swore he wasn't even interested. We need to move now before we're spotted. They have eyes everywhere. 7. Far from being the disruptive force they claimed she was, most of the angelic community of Trayton realized Sequoia was leaving a trail of freed people in her wake. As they stepped into worlds looking for her, there was one voice, on an obscure planet that cried out for her detriment, but they were intentionally being kept away from the more prevalent realities. With the high degree of variance that existed in the multiverse, there was always outliers. It was the strength of being an angel. Considering all the points of view before taking action allowed them to take the best course for all of them. So while there's a disagreement over the Imogen, they were heard as one of the many voices and disregarded as something that wasn't beneficial to the collective. Certain didn't take this as an insult at all. In fact, he welcomed the challenge and rose to it. Their great concern was the human connected to her, the one who wanted all the realities to match her desires, regardless of who was forced to live with the consequences. Sarah K. messages Sebastian, Cuba Knoll's training academy headmaster. Report. The new batch of agents are finished with their training and preparing to ship. However, they have a common psychosis. They believe they're in the middle of a war. It is likely caused by the Imogen's plethorification. Get them here and we'll keep them under close observation. We have a number of outposts that need filling. These planets don't run themselves. Seems like the further we spread, the more we discover. Yes, ma'am, the otter nods. We've recruited a variety of species that could fit inconspicuously where we need them. Many are showing strong sides of diplomacy. Ever Wilfrey sits with Griffin, his supervisor and assistant director of the SIB, freezing mid-conversation as they discuss the Illic threat, realizing everything is wrong. Griffin continues his briefing about the recent developments, not just their world's resistance to Verbtech, but also the aggressive movements against central outposts. Their leader, Triton, slowly escalated the assault so they were flying under the radar. 5A Canol N described her memories to Terrance as they travel, how she was connected to the people, she saw and felt everything they did. Here she was just small and completely alone. The SIB's assistant director snapped his fingers at Ever. Hello? Can you return to this reality, please? I wish I had time to daydream. The agent nods, his superior continuing. You've got to keep your head in this game, kid. We're headed for a war. Sequoia saw it all. The worlds where Central was murdering everyone who had been infected by the Mind Link, and the ones where they were ruled by the Verbtech. She wanted neither of them. The Imogen saw all the worlds where nothing existed, and she saw the worlds where everyone made choices to care for others ahead of themselves. In her journeying, she tried to move them toward that ideal reality, demonstrating the simplicity of it. While she had made all the environments where they lived, she had to let them choose for themselves the type of reality they were going to live in. The journey weighed heavily on her. She'd been in the toxic jungles of Uniflied, on Trenton Branswick's islands. She talked to the robotic plants of Gubiscus. The commoners, gods, and kings had their eyes open, but seemed unchanged as she left. Her body was worn out. The poison from Savania still ran in her veins. She got laser burns on Snooty and had even lost a claw from her right toe on Ravenous, but it was worth it. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that her goodness had left an impression. The Imogen also knew that time was running out, and they weren't trying to hear it. Based on the relation to absolute time, it may be moments after she left or hundreds of years, but she had set it up for all things to eventually come to an end. She wouldn't be a good being if she left them to continue their suffering indefinitely. She longed to bring them all back to her, and that meant allowing their worlds to be completely destroyed. Every world she created was distinct, and yet it was all a blur to her. The creatures and their lives were rushing around her like they were the only things that mattered. We cannot wait for them to strike first, Griffin says to Ever. Sarah K may be the director, but she's clearly underestimating the enemy here. I want you to take a battalion directly to Illic and make them see reason. They must submit to the Furbtech, or else. The Triton Collective suspected nothing as certain rallied voices to his side. They needed a common enemy to overlook their differences, and the Imogen was perfect. If everything was so great, why was your mind link disbanded? Terrence asked 5A Canal N. The government who created us couldn't bear to be treated the same way that we were. Triton used his attacks on Central Outpost as a diversion to his main objective, moving his troops onto Central itself. There were thousands there with more on their way, all listening for his signal, and he was watching, waiting for the perfect moment. Everything felt wrong to Ever as he boarded a transverser with troops headed for Illic. He didn't want to fight them, but he had to find out how he had gotten here. She moves towards her reconvergence in the corridor, knowing that she'd done all the work she could. As Sequoia looked forward through time, she saw the many paths that the worlds would go down. Many of them were not good, but there were a few where she saw even just a glimmer of hope. The people she affected, in turn affected others, and it had made their civilizations great, every generation passing down the love that they'd been shown. Sebastian sits in his tall-backed, velvet-covered chair by the fireplace, sipping his tea, and glad to be rid of the most recent recruits. For all the time that he had served as the headmaster, this was the first batch that had truly given him the full-blown heebie-jeebies. In her welcoming address, Sarah Kay could see why the Otter was concerned. These new agents had a darkness about them. They were trained, though, and she needed them. It started as a whisper, but steadily grew louder as Traitons across the multiverse saw the Imogen moving towards the corridor. If we want to stop her, the time is now, the Outliers cried. She wants to disband all forms of unity so she can be the ultimate power in existence. And suddenly an idea that had seemed absurd when it was spoken by just one or two of them was suddenly making sense as more of them were repeating it. The Traitons on the Council turned their attention from the human who was recreating the universes to her will to the thing that they felt was the source of her power. They must stop it if they wanted to protect themselves, they said. This was their moment. While a slim portion of the Triton Collective that remained in disagreement, they were now seen as outliers, and their voices were disregarded, so they acquiesced. 8. Their arrival on Centric was met by angelic hosts curious to see who would dare to approach them, but Terrans would say they were only on business from the Bureau. They scanned the agent's Furbtech, checking his credentials for clearance to speak to the Council, but Saki and Gabriel were called instead. What authority do you think you have, they asked, their choral voices in unison. Meridian is among us, and they are the right hand of the director. What she knows, he knows. And what he knows, we know. She said nothing about your arrival, so be gone. You're a trespasser. 5A Canal N had remained quiet, awed by the majestic beings, but she stepped out of Terrence's shadow. I want you to know the danger you're in. One of yours, the highest member of the Council, had been corrupted by an incomprehensible evil. It is rare for angels with their many eyes, ears, and lives to be surprised, but the little creature's audacity caught them completely off guard, and they roared with laughter. Both the Guardians here and all of the angel collectives spread across the multiverse. Terrance yells over their voices, "Silence!" and they immediately fall quiet under his psionic abilities. I want you to consider her words, as preposterous as they seem. No one among you changes their minds quickly. Doesn't that seem strange to you? You creatures are like the mountains that you live in, unmoved by time itself, and yet one of you has changed their mind. Perhaps she's noticed something that you're blind to. 1,000 voices rustle as they discuss the absurdity and murmurs, asking him to elaborate, but the agent held his ground. We will only speak to the Council. 9. The SIB director lunches with Sura in the highest goat. We've even got the Hell Worlds under observation, she says. We're letting them do what they've always done and eat up useless quanta, she laughs, but we're not letting them spread. Yes, the older man says. In my experience, those things generally take care of themselves. Unknown to them, beyond the goat's door portal, Illic swarmed the city's streets and skies because, while the building storefront sat in a definite location in space-time on Central, the interior was worlds away in a location known only to Cookie. How's the Deja Vertigo? Juan says as they eat their roast sitar sandwiches. It's better. I'm not sure why I've been having such bad flare-ups. I really want them to stop, she laughs. I'm not the only one either. It seems to be an epidemic. I'll survive. I know what's real and what's not. Too many people depend on me. Sarah Kate brushes crumbs off her leather blazer. I'm excited about the stability we've created. I think we're ready to do another big push outward, she says with a big smile. The multiverse is infinite. There's so much more that we haven't seen yet. Don't be too hasty, Sarah cautions his protege. It's better to rule well than overreach. A robotic human agent from Disparate staggers through the door covered in someone's blood. Directors, I'm sorry to disturb you, but it's urgent. They're here. Sarah Kay stands, unsnapping her holster. Stay behind me, sir, she says. I don't need your protection, Juan says sadly. I'm not a target on anyone's radar. Shush, the director says, opening the door portal to see the mayhem in the streets. You're important to me. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you. Agents from all over the multiverse fight against a storm of Illic, high-powered weapons creating cacophony of carnage. Multicolored blood splatters on Sarah Kay's coat as she commandeers a vehicle, overriding its ignition to evacuate herself and Surah. They use their firm tech to enter the lockdown building, the interior in an absolute frenzy. A post-human from KTM scurries over to the director. They wouldn't accept the terms of surrender, and they brought their entire fighting force. I should have erased them when we've discovered them, Sarah says to them as they make their way to the director's office. The doors just appeared one day in the Phoenix Club. Bam! All 12 in a row. I wanted to seal them off then and there, but the hotel officials didn't respect our authority at the time. They've come around now, but it's too late. Juan and the director step inside the VR chamber, appearing to agents across the multiverse. Abandon your post immediately, Sarah Kay says. Return to HQ by the fastest route, or you'll wish you're born on Surma being eaten alive by the slime. 10. In the midst of the battle on Central, Triton remembered his brother's words as he left Illic. Something's coming for us, and I'm tired of waiting to see what it is. Gerfon led a squad of second ranks against armored agents in mech suits, dodging plasma streams and supersonic grenades, tearing into them with their bare claws. They carefully planned their assault with information stolen from the FurbTech network. They all knew this was a suicide mission. They accepted it, knowing that it had to be done. The director was too proud in thinking her plan of action was best for everyone. She and her agency had stolen the identities of every planet they had come across, making them all identical. The Illic had resisted, but they couldn't stand by any longer. Agents retreated, leaving the entrance to the Bureau unguarded, and Wharton and some first ranks landed, cautiously approaching before cannons started firing. All around the city, the FurbTechs began to speak, amplifying Surah's words. The fighting continued, but the louder it got, the louder the owl-like creatures spoke. Citizens of the multiverse, they said, you cannot win. We are too strong and too many. Even if you killed every citizen of this planet, there are infinite number of worlds to replace us. Why are you fighting against such a colossal force? It's madness. Wouldn't you prefer to have the greatest force of any universe you have ever seen fighting on your side? Lay down your aggression, submit to the will of Central, and join our unified body. This is your last warning, Sarah Kay says to the FurbTech. I believe you're intelligent enough to see that this is the only logical choice. The other is total annihilation. Triton dropped through the ceiling of the director's office, knocking Sarah Kay to the floor. He puts his foot on her belly, bending over to growl at her. Who will lead them if you're gone? The choice is yours. Do you want to die a ruler, or keep living? Sarah Kay tries to free herself, but isn't able to, Triton's claws shredding her blouse, but leaving her skin unharmed. He grabs her by the throat, his hand wrapping all the way around her tiny neck, and he lifts her from the ground. I see you've made your choice, he says, before throwing her at a large window overlooking the battle below. Her body smashes through the glass, further shredding her clothes but leaving her unharmed, and she hurtles toward the street. She knew all of this was her fault. She made the world exactly as she wanted it, and this was the result. Of course they'd rebel. That's exactly what she would do. Her mind raced for what she thought she could do to make it right. Led by Triton, the Illic had gone to war against the Mind Link. With Central technology, they crossed the multiverse, destroying civilizations. Triton stood in the director's office, giving his final report. We've won, but there's no one left to celebrate. All gray hair and wrinkles now. Sarah Kay smiles sadly as she looks down at the empty streets. We've suffered many losses, but there's no way for us to be totally free. Triton speaks from the corner, their voices filling the somber room. Not all timelines are so lucky, they say. Many fall prey to their weaknesses, becoming the thing they try to destroy. Many lose everything. We are the lucky few. Sarah Kay and Triton nod in agreement. There is one creature, however, who you've upset more than any other, that he goes on. The Imogen. She is the reason for all of this. She was the one that allowed the mind link to spread. She's powerful enough to control it, yet she chooses not to. She could have saved all of your people, but instead she chose to let this happen to you. The director shows up on Ever's mech suit's HUD as he smashes the last Ferbtech nest on Ahriman. I want you to head to the Imogen's location in the hallway. She's a multiversal citizen, the director says to the Angel and the Illic. It's time she carried her weight. How can any of us be expected to make good decisions without all the information? She can view all realities, and she's withholding that from us. Griffin radios to the alien ship. Pick us up. We need to use your transporter. Are you insane? Ever asks. They still have a bounty on us. The huge metallic craft descends from the pitch-black night sky, the thrusters lighting up the two men. Pirates don't hold grudges over profit. The wolf-face agent smiles at him. Inside the Triton Collective, Certain smiles to himself. He wasn't even the one that suggested they go after the Imogen, but he was relieved nonetheless. The end was near. 11. Griffin's communicator tweets as they leave the atmosphere, and the agent answers. Why aren't you taking a transversor? Sarah Kay asks when she appears on screen. Kay, my love, I didn't feel like plotting the course, and this seemed more fun. Sarah Kay shakes her head, letting out a deep sigh. It's never easy with you, is it? You wouldn't love me if it was, the wolf-faced man says. You like the challenge. She smiles at him. Just get there safe, okay? Deputize those aliens if you have to. Yes, ma'am, Griffin says, giving her a two-finger salute. Over and out. Why didn't we take the transversor? Ever asks. It would have been much faster. Because, my boy, I don't want my wife to be responsible for looting the prison world in the Graylian Fissure. We're getting suit upgrades. No one will have to be the wiser. She could lose her position if anyone thought it was government-sanctioned. Plausible deniability is the heart of any good relationship, Griffin says with a wink. Everything down there should be dead after our last sweep, but you never can be sure about leftover automatons. The balance of power is really tricky right now. They let Sarah Kay do all the dirty work, and then those who can't stomach it rush in and act like they were the heroes. Better they didn't have any ammunition, since they will try. On Central, Sarah Kay watches Griffin head into the fissure, listening to his conversation. She didn't want to spoil his fun. He needed to blow off steam with everything she had made him do. He'd been her #1 killing machine for over 20 years. Suddenly, his transmission cut off, signal disappearing from the screen. Good old Griff, she thought. He'd never tell her he loved her, and he was almost always away, but he'd take a plasma ray to protect her, and that meant more to her than anything else. 12. His ambition for control led to everyone who was left on the network to be slaughtered, 5A_K0N says, standing before the Council. He must be held accountable. Sebastian shuffles through the bureau hall, stripping slightly, but his cane catches him. He's disgusted at what the CIB has become. He only trained killers at the academy. They were necessary, but they were all that had survived, and the halls were filled with them. You've brought serious accusations against us, Triton says, from all corners of the multiverse. And now you want us to surrender ourselves to you, a creature who lives in only one place at one time, disconnected from all its other selves. The human nods, unfazed by the angel's eminence all around her. If you continue to give him influence through you, you will bring death on yourself and your people. As she spoke, she could feel part of the network coming back to life. She tried to contain her excitement. They must not know about them, or the Bureau would destroy them. Have a seat, Sarah Kay says as the otter enters her office. I'm sorry to have taken you out of retirement, but we have a problem. The walls light up with data, cross-sections of the rug showing glowing pinpoints on its flattened display. It's come back. I thought we'd taken care of it. You spent your entire career helping me to end this. Where did we go wrong, Sebastian? What stone did we leave unturned as we scorched every piece of that mental slime, scrubbing it off our reality? Why won't it die? Connie died a lifetime ago, but he felt her reality-bending ability filling him with dread. He knew it was Sarah Kay. She didn't know that she was a part of this conflict. The council debated in many voices. Terrence and 5A_K0N found it impossible to keep up. The Tritons defended themselves while tearing down the imposter who defied the Council. The previously mind-linked human took it in stride. Her life had already been stolen from her. She had nothing left to lose. Finally, the room was silent. We cannot decide. Trayton suggests taking them to the Imogen. Let her decide their fate. He didn't want it to continue. The otter had to stop her madness. He was tired. He couldn't bear another decades-long war. He fumbled, drawing his neutron fuser, but he got it out and shot Sarah Kay. The consequences were better than the alternative. So many of them hadn't been killed and were waiting to reconnect. 5A_Canal N realized. The Bureau hadn't gotten them all yet. Trayton still said, take us to her. 13. Everything was going according to Certain's plan. Everything, that is, except for 5A_Canal N's need to stop on every world they entered to gather the scattered mind link. His instincts told him that she was deliberately stalling, but he let it go for the time being. He was so close to reaching his goal. He didn't want to scare his quarry. With only a little bit of encouragement, he'd gotten most of the multiverse stripped of life. They moved from dead world to dead world, the smell of carnage still lingering in the air. Frankly, he was surprised 5A_Canal N was finding anyone. The odds of their survival, especially on every single planet, was incredibly low. Really, that's what was bothering him more than having to wait for them to show. How did they even exist at all? Angels guarded him. He couldn't do what he wanted, so he watched and waited. What honestly made him the most upset was seeing 5A_Canal N's joy at reconnecting with them. Didn't she know that life was pain, and only death was waiting for us all? End of Chapter 9. Thank you for listening to this audio presentation of She Came From Nowhere, a series novelization written and performed by Caleb Morazi. If you'd like to read more of this book, read chapters from the series, listen to audio, and further support the development of this project, please go to patreon.com/SheCameFromNowhere, link in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe this video. Until next time, we'll see you soon.